Thank you so much for inviting me to this conference. My name is Schultz and I am the head of the Global Citizenship Program at Rysensteen Gymnasium in Copenhagen, Denmark. I'm also a teacher of history and physical education. My job at Rysensteen entails working with partner schools all around the world, in Argentina, in the United States, in Egypt, and of course also in South Korea. This has given me an opportunity to look inside many different educational systems, ways of teaching, their approaches to pedagogy, and also to the academic content. And because of this, I have reflected for many years now on the strengths and weaknesses of the Danish system when compared to systems all around the world. Apart from my experience at Rysensteen High School, I'm also the CEO of a newly started platform for exchanging pedagogical and academic ideas called Nordic Teaching. The aim of Nordic Teaching is to videotape different teachers' approaches to teaching all around the world, especially in Denmark, and to create online courses and delivering them to people and teachers in other countries. I've also, before my job here at Rysensteen, traveled around the world and lived for a while in Cairo, Egypt, to have insights into how the culture of Egypt is and also how the educational system in Egypt functions. I have also, before that, I have also had experiences in South America, in Colombia to be exact, with both having a business there, but also having an insight into how the educational system works there. That's just to say that I've had experiences with seeing and reflecting upon different educational systems all around the world for many, many years. So that was just a little bit about me, and now on to the presentation. And now on to the presentation, which I have chosen to call Danish Education Forming Democratic, Happy and Capable Citizens. The reason that I have given my presentation this title is because I believe that the Danish educational system has not only one, but three different purposes, which sets it aside from many other educational systems all around the world. In Denmark, we don't only focus on educating for the workforce. We also focus on educating for being part of democracy and also for being a happy citizen, or maybe more correct to say that we try to focus on the well-being of our students. So the structure of this presentation will be, first of all, to introduce you to these three purposes. What do they actually mean? Then secondly, to try to find out or present why we have these three purposes, because that actually comes down to an historical development and also to a socio-psychological belief in the approach to teaching our students. And after introducing the historical and psychological background to these three purposes, I will give an introduction into how these three purposes are realized, are implemented in the everyday life of the Danish school system, in both our classes and also in the school culture as a whole. And after I've given this introduction, I will finish off by giving a few reflections on the strengths and weaknesses of this very unique educational system when compared or when seen in the light of the challenges, both political and also educational challenges of the 21st century. There are obvious strengths in the Danish system, but there are also obvious weaknesses. But I do believe that the strengths that we have in the Danish system can be taught and can also can be taught to other teachers and schools all around the world. And these schools and teachers and school leaders can also benefit immensely from learning some of these competences and strengths that we have. So the Danish educational system, as I stated previously, has three different purposes. One is to educate capable citizens. Of course, that is not a surprise, because all systems all around the world would like to educate capable citizens. But for us, maybe it means something a little different than for educational systems in other parts of the world. Because the Danish system has a very strong focus, emphasis on bringing the real life, so to speak, into the classroom. So that we try to give the students competencies as opposed to just reproducing knowledge. Competencies to go into the real world and be able to think for themselves and to create for themselves. And in that way, be workers and also innovators that can have a meaningful position in the labor market of the 21st century. So to put it very simply, the difference, I think, between the Danish educational system and other educational systems is that we focus much more on competencies, much more on teaching the students how to learn, as opposed to just teaching them how to reproduce knowledge. Another very special feature of the Danish educational system is that we educate to become part of a democratic society. What does that mean? For us, it means to be able to take a constructive part in the Danish society. For example, by having a job, of course. But a constructive position, a constructive way to be a citizen in Denmark also means to be part of a critical debate, to be able to criticize the people in power. Because for us, this is not seen as a conflict. This is not seen as opposing democracy. This is seen as being part of democracy. Because democracy only lives through criticism of the people in power. So we would actually like for our students to be constructive and critical, and also be able to listen to the opponents they may have in a political debate. That is very important. And the third purpose of the Danish educational system, which is equally as important as the two other purposes I have stated, is that we focus on creating happy students, or at least we focus on their mental well-being. So what does that actually mean? It means that when we have discussions or talks between the students and teachers, when we have talks between their parents and teachers, there's a huge focus on how the students are doing socially and also psychologically. And that starts already in elementary school, but it also continues into high school and not as much in university, but there is still this focus. So they will be constantly evaluated, or at least we will have a constant focus on their development as happy human beings, so to speak. So the reason that Denmark's educational system is focused not only on teaching the students competencies which are relevant for going to university, for further education, and for being part of the labor market, has to do with Danish history. We will find the different reasons for the emphasis on democracy, for the emphasis on well-being, and for the emphasis on competencies through a development in Danish history that took its beginning in the middle of the 19th century, that is the 1800s. And first I will take you through the democratic part of our focus in the Danish school system. Why are we so focused on creating democratic citizens? If you go back to the beginning of the 1800s, Denmark's school system was very authoritarian, which meant that our students were only meant to reproduce knowledge, and we didn't really focus very much on having all of them. We didn't want them to take part in society in the sense that they were not all, in the sense of the powers of the people in power, capable of taking part in the public debate, for example. And farmers, for example, were only meant to be taught the very basic competences of the school. For example, being able to read, understand the Bible, do very basic math. But there were no ideas beyond that. Then in the beginning of, or in the middle rather, of the 1800s, a priest called Grundtvig established the Danish idea of almendannelse, of Bildung in German, of general education in English. And his idea was that education was not only for the few, for the learned, education should be for everyone, also for the farmers. And education should not only be about reproducing knowledge, it should be about creativity, about a certain amount of critical thinking, about creating citizens for a democratic society. This way of thinking didn't really break through in the normal public system, but it broke through in the højskole or high school system, which some of you maybe know now because of Mr. John Ho, which has been working with that højskole and also efterskole in Korea. So at that time you could say that you had a public system which was still very focused on just reproducing knowledge, and did have a very hierarchical idea of the positions of different parts of the Danish society. Farmers were supposed to be only farmers, not take part in a public debate, not be necessarily very literate. They should be literate, but they shouldn't be necessarily be knowledgeable about different famous writers, and not about complex mathematics. That was what went on in the public system. At the same time, you had a system, or at least the beginning of a system outside of that, with højskoler, with efterskoler, where people chose to go themselves after finishing the normal school, and actually had an education here which was much more focused on creative thinking, on creating independent and also critically thinking citizens. And if we look at the development of this way of focusing on democratic citizens, that really takes off when we come to the 1930s in Denmark. At this time, Denmark is under pressure from Germany, Nazi Germany, and there is a focus on strengthening the democratic mindset of Danish people to, so to speak, protect democracy from within. And we can also see in the 1937 school law that there is a strong focus on nationalistic values, but also on democratic values. It is stated in the 1937 law that Danish students should be able to respect other people's opinions and should be educated to be part of a democracy. So in this way you can see some of Grundtvig's idea getting into the public system, and thereby creating the first purpose of the threefold purposes that I have chosen to focus on, namely creating democratic citizens. And after the Second World War was over in 1945, this was even more evident in Denmark. Denmark had, of course, suffered because we were occupied by the Nazi Germans. And there was a huge focus on not going back to these very difficult times of living without democracy. So many Danish thinkers and politicians focused on how we could strengthen Danish democracy. One of the most important thinkers was called Hal Koch, and he was another priest theologian, but also political thinker. And his idea of Danish democracy is still very important today and plays a huge part in the Danish educational system. And his idea was as follows, that democracy is not only about the process of election. It is not only about creating a winner and a loser during elections. It is about a culture of being able to talk with each other and to try to understand your opponents, your political opponents' opinions, and from there, through the political debate, to create the best possible answer for the whole country. And even after an election where one political party may win and the other may lose, you will still have to listen to the other political parties, the ones that lost. And this way of perceiving democracy is really still very much evident today in the way that we think about democracy in Denmark, and also in the way that we teach democracy or live democracy, so to speak, every day in the Danish educational system. It sets us apart from many other countries. I could give an example here, the United States, where at least for the last 10 to 15 years, the idea has been that if you win the elections, then you don't need to listen to the ones who lost. So they only, in my opinion at least, they focus very much on the election process and not about the culture of democratic dialogue. But Hal Koch strengthened that, and that was also brought into the Danish educational system to an even larger degree than before. And you can see that in the Danish 1960 school law, where we introduced a subject called orientation, which was focused on bringing knowledge about society as a whole to the students, and also focused on them being able to not only understand society, but also being able to discuss in an orderly manner with their counterparts or with their opponents, political opponents in their classes. So the idea with this school law was that not only would democracy be taught in theory, it would also be lived in real life, so to speak. And from there on, all other Danish school laws have actually strengthened this idea of democratic dannelse, which started with Grundtvig and was very much strengthened all through the years surrounding the Second World War. The other purpose of the Danish educational system, namely the focus on the happiness of our students and on the well-being of our students, can be seen as a reflection of the Danish welfare state. The Danish welfare state was created after the Second World War, and is, generally speaking, an idea that the state will take care of all its citizens. It will do so through a very high tax payment from all its citizens, and through those tax monies, the state will take care of create free education, free healthcare, free libraries, so on and so forth. And the underlying idea behind that is that every citizen in Denmark should have the right to have a job, and if you don't have a job, then at least be subsidized to the point where you can help yourself to get another job. Every school child should be able to have an education, and not only any education, but a very good education with the best teachers and the best material and pedagogical visions. every citizen should be able to have free healthcare, and so on and so forth. And of course, by having this idea in the whole political system and in society as a whole, it was very obvious that teachers, now also during the 1950s and 60s especially, were supposed to not only focus on how well their students were doing academically, but also how well they were doing socially and mentally. And if you look at the Danish law from 1960, it actually states, should empower the children to go out into the social and business life next door, and that the school should promote the children's opportunities to grow up as harmonious, happy, and good people. So it's actually put into the law now, the purpose of the Danish educational system, that we as a school, as teachers, as school management, must focus on the well-being of our students. And I can readily say now that I have seen many other school systems and see how they function in praxis, that we in the Danish school system are, I would say, more focused on the well-being of our students, the social and psychological well-being of our students, than I've seen in many other places around the world. Then maybe we suffer in other departments, but we do have a very strong focus on that. You can also see that through the fact that we have a number of student counselors, for example, at my school at Rysensteen. These student counselors are not only meant to guide the students towards educations in the future, they are very much meant to take care of their well-being. So every month, the students who are struggling with social or psychological problems, they will come to a student counselor and talk about this. And at the same time, the teachers are also very much aware of this. So they look out for the students who are not doing that well socially or psychologically. And they will bring this, first of all, to the students, and talk with the students about that. And if that is not enough, they will bring that to the student counselors, who will talk to the students about that. And in the end, we also, which is very common in Denmark, have psychologists connected to the school that we can reach out to if the problems get too big for the students. I don't believe that we have more problems. I do actually believe that we have fewer problems with our students' well-being than other countries, but we are more focused on their well-being than I've seen in many other countries at least. So the last purpose of the Danish educational system, which I would like to focus on during this presentation, or which I've chosen to focus on during this presentation, is to create capable citizens. Now that may seem like very self-evident that all educational systems all around the world focus on that. But as I stated in the beginning of my presentation, I think Denmark is somewhat different from other countries in the way we actually try to do this. We are different in the way because we focus much more on competencies such as critical thinking, innovative thinking, than we focus on reproducing knowledge. The question is, of course, where does that come from? And in my view, it comes from the so-called Cultural Revolution of the 1960s in Denmark. The Cultural Revolution was not, as we know it from China, a violent thing. It was in Denmark a very non-violent revolution that took part in many places around society. It was a change of the way people wanted to live. It was a change in the way they perceived the school system. It was a change also in very concrete features of popular culture, such as music and films and so on. One of the very important features of this cultural revolution was an uprising by the young people. Again, a very non-violent uprising, but a claim and a demand by the young people to the people in power, the politicians, but also to the professors and the teachers, to change the way that the school system was functioning. But because still at this time in the 1960s, the Danish school system was still very much focused on reproducing knowledge. So the students wanted, and they were supported by many progressive teachers, they wanted to bring, so to speak, real life into the classrooms. So instead of just reproducing knowledge, and instead of focusing on learning Latin inside and outside, they wanted to focus on real life problems. Not that it shouldn't be taught in an academic way, it should be taught in an academic way, but the school system, the material, and the way it was taught was supposed to move much closer to real life. And by doing that, through this cultural revolution, the Danish educational system changed a lot. The material changed. It was written into all the purpose clauses of our national curricula that real life should be a part of teaching, that all courses, no matter if it was mathematics, physics, English, should be applicable to something happening in real life. Pedagogics also changed a lot. Instead of just focusing again on reproducing knowledge, there was a huge focus now on project work, of focusing more on the competencies of the student, of bringing the student to the center of learning instead of having the teacher as the center of teaching. And this development has actually continued ever since the 1960s, even to a point where people maybe 5-10 years ago said we can also go too far. If everything becomes group work, project-based work, we will not be able to teach our students enough factual knowledge in order for them to take part in a meaningful way in project-based work. This is a point I will get back to when I get to my reflections in the end of this presentation about the strengths and weaknesses of the Danish educational system. But that was like an historical background for the three purposes of the Danish educational system, namely the forming democratic, happy, and also capable citizens. And now we'll move on to the part where I will be discussing how these different features of the Danish educational systems are actually realized and implemented in everyday practices in the Danish schools. Implemented in the everyday practices of teachers and school leaders all around the country. In this part, I will introduce you to how these three purposes, creating democratic citizens, focusing on well-being, and creating also capable citizens, are realized in the everyday practices of the Danish educational system. I will divide this part into four different dimensions. A social dimension, a material dimension, a pedagogical dimension, and lastly also a school culture or whole school dimension. And I will start with the social dimension. In the social dimension of the Danish educational system, we focus on the well-being of our students. And one thing that is very important to state here is that the power distance between the teachers and the students is very low in the Danish system. So the Danish teachers are almost perceived as friends, but not as friends. They're perceived with respect, the teachers, but equally the students are perceived with respect and are addressed with respect by the teachers. So there's this idea that the teachers and the students, are not separated by a barrier of power. They're separated more by the amount of knowledge that the teacher has. But you could also say maybe more correctly that they are not separated at all, that they share a common endeavor of trying to reach as high a level as possible of learning and teaching, but also of creating well-functioning human beings. So as I stated before, this social dimension means that the teachers are very much focused on the well-being of the students. Of course, how are the students doing? It is not uncommon that the teachers will talk to them after a lesson and say, I could see that today you were not doing too well, or I have seen for the last months that you have been not doing so well, you haven't maybe delivered the papers that you were supposed to deliver, or at least you just look as if you're not doing too well mentally. And this is very common. And as I said before, then we also have a system to take care of that with school counselors and also with psychologists if we need them. Another feature of this focus, this social dimension, is that it's not only about the students themselves, it is also about how they interact with other students. So it is not enough, so to speak, that a student is doing well if this student is acting as a bully. So the teachers will focus very much on also on how the students are doing with their friends and their classmates, and talk to them about this. It is required by law that at least once a month the students in elementary school will have one lesson with a teacher where they will talk about the social dynamics of the class. And this actually continues into high school. So they will actually talk about how are we doing as a social entity. Are we treating each other with enough respect? Are we all playing together on the playing field? Or the playing ground? When we have a discussion in class, is this conducted with a sufficient amount of respect, and so on and so forth? So it is very important to stress that when we focus on creating happy students, it is not only about themselves if they are happy, but it's also about them creating happiness with other students. Then I think also it is important to stress that even though the Danish educational system can also be competitive, it is probably not as competitive as in South Korea. So we try not to have too much focus on the exams, in the sense that the students should not be too focused on the grades they will receive in the end, but focus more on actually enjoying learning. Because if they enjoy how to learn, then we believe that they will actually be better learners, and then they will in the end also receive better marks or grades for their performances. And along the way, they will also be happier. I'm not saying that we succeed with this every day, because there is also a huge focus on Danish students, of course, on which grades they get. But that is the ideal of the Danish system, and I do believe that to a certain degree we are successful in trying to point the focus of the Danish students not towards the grades all the time, but more towards learning and enjoying how to learn and becoming smarter, and also becoming simply a better human being. The other dimension of you need to understand, to be able to understand how these three purposes of the Danish educational system are realized in everyday practices, is the material dimension. The material dimension has to do with the material we use for teaching. So Danish textbooks are not very focused on reproducing knowledge. Danish textbooks are much more focused on creating competencies. Danish textbooks and Danish teachers, which by the way have a huge amount of freedom to choose their own materials when they work with the students, are very focused on bringing real life into the classrooms. What does that mean? To give you a few very concrete examples, it means that, for example, me as a history teacher, if I am doing a course on ancient Rome, I will try to make it as relevant for the society that the students live in as possible. So, for example, we could study the political system of Rome, and then I will try to make comparisons to the political system of Denmark, also the political dynamics of Denmark today. We could also focus on the Roman legacy of law, of culture, of religion, of science, and how that has maybe changed the way we think today. So it's all about trying to make it relevant for the students. Now, that does not mean that the students will not know anything about ancient Rome. They will have to know a lot of facts about ancient Rome. But we will always try to relate it to something that seems relevant for the students in their everyday lives. To give you another example also from history, it could also be doing a course on the Korean Civil War, which our Korean class, we have a class which is focused on Korea, they of course do every year. Now, when we teach the Korean Civil War, of course we teach about the dates, and the reasons behind the Korean Civil War, but we very much also focus on the consequences of the Korean Civil War on society today. How does it reflect, how does it affect Korean society today, both in South Korea, but also in North Korea? And even also, how does it affect the relationships between the countries in all of Southeast Asia and maybe even the whole world? How does the Korean Civil War and the conflict between the North and the South, what effect does that have upon the globe as a whole? So we try to bring real life into the classrooms. And again, these are two examples from history, but they could just as well been from physics or mathematics. And to give you another example from mathematics, that could be using mathematics to understand, for example, social inequality in the United States. So using statistical data and statistics to understand if the United States, or how much the United States is an unequal society, we use mathematics to try to break down numbers, to understand certain dynamics, political dynamics around us. So we could actually go through all of our courses, all of our subjects, and I could say the same thing for all of them, that all courses try to bring in real life into the classroom. So we've talked about the material dimension of the Danish educational system and how that reflects the three purposes of the Danish educational system. Another very, very important feature of the Danish educational system is, of course, the pedagogical dimension. Pedagogics in Denmark is very much focused on bringing competences to the students as opposed to just reproducing knowledge. The ideal is for the students to become able to navigate in all kinds of different situations in their work life and in their social life and also in society as a whole. And we believe that we best prepare them for this by giving them competencies which are relevant for navigating in this society, as opposed to just giving them a lot of facts to reproduce. Now, this does not mean that facts are not important. They are still important. The students still need to know when the First World War started and when it ended, and the Second World War for that matter, of course, because otherwise they will be subject to manipulation by fake news, for example. They need to have a factual basis for their analysis and the way of thinking about society as a whole. But where other educational systems maybe stop with reproducing, after reproducing knowledge, that is, so to speak, enough, the Danish educational system is much more focused on what the students will use their factual knowledge for. And we focus very much on the students being able to use factual knowledge to be critical thinkers. For example, when we think about the Korean Civil War, then knowing all about the background of the Korean Civil War and the outcome of the Korean Civil War, they will be able to better understand texts today, for example, political texts from, let's say, Kim Jong-un, and what he is, when he's stating something about South Korea, the students will have all the knowledge that they need to be able to understand the context that Kim Jong-un is speaking into, but they will also be able, or we try to teach them how to be very critical of what he's saying. Why is Kim Jong-un saying this? What is the background? What is his interest? Who is he communicating to? And so on and so forth. So critical thinking is a very important feature of the Danish educational system, and is always founded on a foundation of factual knowledge. In the Danish school system, we also have a huge focus on innovative thinking, which means that the students are taught how to use their factual knowledge to create new inventions, and not only now in the school system, but also when they leave us and they go to university, and when they later on join the labor market. There's a huge focus on that at the moment in the Danish educational system, and basically you can say that the way we work with it is again to try to bring them certain competencies, and from there on they will work with very open assignments. So instead of us asking them very exact questions, you need to solve this and this, when did the Second World War started, it will be more like in the United States they have a challenge with communicating across political boundaries. How can we help solve this problem? And then the students will think innovatively about how to solve this problem. Also, another feature of the Danish pedagogics is to try to teach the Danish students how to present. Danish students in general are very self-confident when they do oral presentations. They are able, many of them, to stand in front of 10, 20, 30, 50 people and do presentations in Danish and in English. And they're able to do this because this is a part of the Danish educational system. This is part of our classes, that they need to do it during their classes. And why do we focus on this? We of course focus on this because it's good for their self-esteem, but also because it is a competence that many businesses are looking for. So a question that I've received many times about these competencies and Danish pedagogics is that it all sounds very interesting that you teach these competencies, but how do we actually test them? And I cannot go too far into the evaluation system in this presentation, but I can just tell you that all of these competencies are tested in the Danish educational system. They're tested through oral exams, they're tested through written exams, and they are basically tested by not having too much focus on multiple choice. We don't have multiple choice exams, but we have exams instead where students will need to do essays, do mathematical assignments, where they more have to think about how can I actually solve this open problem myself using mathematics, as opposed to just answering answer number A or answer B or answer C. So it is very important for me to emphasize here that these competences are tested every year, and they are tested in a very serious manner. So it's not something that just lives in the classroom and then after that we cannot in any way, shape or form see how well the students are performing. We can do that, and we do that through the very special Danish evaluation system. The last dimension were the three purposes of the Danish educational system: forming democratic citizens, focusing on well-being, and forming also capable citizens, are realized every day, is the whole school dimension. The whole school dimension means that when we focus on these three purposes, it is not only something that happens in the classroom, it happens in the very life of the school every day. It happens through a very distinct school culture. So, for example, the focus on well-being is strengthened through many different committees that we as a school support every day. So the students, for example, at my school, they have maybe 20 different committees for voluntary sports, for doing voluntary work for underprivileged children, for doing music, and so on and so forth. Most of it is organized by the students themselves, and it is just supported by teachers and school management. And we do this because we think it is a good idea for the students' well-being, and it's also very good for their development as whole and democratic-minded citizens. Also, when it comes to the democratic purpose of the Danish educational system, it is very important to stress that this is also very much part of the whole school dimension. Because in the Danish school system, it is by law required that 2 students from the school council must be members of the school board. So the students will have a say in every important decision of my school and in all other schools all around the country. So this is a very concrete way to teach the students about democracy in Denmark. This is a way to show them that democracy is not only something that we talk about in theory, it is also something that we practice every day. And the students can, through this mechanism, experience how their own ideas will actually define the school that they attend. For example, at my school, we have this international program, which I am the head of, and the students every month bring new ideas to the development of this international program to me and to the school board and to the principal. So the whole school dimension is a very important dimension in strengthening these 3 competences or purposes, that we have talked about, namely forming democratic citizens, forming capable citizens, and focusing on the well-being of students. So one school of thought when it comes to the strengths and weaknesses of the Danish educational system in the light of the demands of the 21st century is that Denmark will risk falling behind if we still, other countries that is, if we still focus so much on trying to form democratic-minded citizens and trying to focus on their well-being. The idea being that other countries are only focused on strengthening their students' competencies, and the students will leave the schools with much more relevant competencies, and so the states and the countries where politicians and the school systems have a focus on these competencies, as opposed to the Danish system where we also focus on other purposes, they will eventually overtake us by a much more efficient workforce. There's one school of thought that even exists to a certain degree in Denmark. Not very much, but it does exist. We are afraid that we will be overtaken economically and maybe also politically by countries, especially in Southeast Asia, who are extremely competitive, and these people are afraid that we spend too much time focusing on the well-being of our students and also on forming democratic-minded students. So, of course, my opinion on this is that I don't believe that this criticism is relevant. Of course, we need to take it very seriously that countries such as China and other countries, of course, in Southeast Asia, they are moving very fast, and students are studying many hours every day. And we need to take it seriously if we see that our students are not studying enough. And I do believe we have a challenge there. Some of our students, they have for too long a time been used to having a welfare state that will help them no matter what. And maybe they have become a little lazy and not ambitious enough. But that's only a small percentage of the students. Most of the Danish students are very ambitious. But of course, we need to take this very seriously. But in saying that, I also believe that the Danish system has strengths that can also be used in competition with other countries, which is also the reason I believe that we see a huge interest from other countries in the Danish educational system. I believe this interest, the interest that we're seeing at the moment, is both because many other countries, of course, are very interested in having more focus on creating happy students. Of course, nobody wants to see their students suffer. No parents want to see the students suffer, and no teachers want to see their students suffer. But when we see this huge focus in the Danish educational system from all around the world, I believe it is not only because of the happiness feature, so to speak, of the Danish educational system, it is also because the way that we teach is also strengthening competencies that are very relevant for competing with other countries, if you want to see it like that. The competencies that we're working with in the Danish system, such as critical thinking, as innovative thinking, competences that we also relate to democratic citizens and that we also relate actually to well-being, are extremely relevant for the workforce of the 21st century. The thing is, what we are educating for now, when students start in elementary school today, there's no way of knowing what they will be doing in 10 to 12 years. And not only because we don't know what they will choose to work with, also because we don't know what direction technology has taken. So instead of focusing on just reproducing the knowledge, it is much more relevant to try to teach the students how to learn and teach them competencies that can be used in different settings and different contexts. By doing that, we will make our teaching relevant no matter what direction society takes and what direction technology takes us. Because if we only focus on reproducing knowledge, we do run the risk of teaching our students some facts and that are totally irrelevant when they finish elementary school and high school. So I do very much believe that the Danish system, when it works and when the students are as ambitious as we would like them to be, then it is not only a force of good for creating more happy and democratic-minded citizens, it is also a force for creating students who are very much competitive in the 21st century's workforce. And when we talk about well-being, the focus that we have on well-being and the school of thought that maybe thinks that our focus on well-being is too much, then you could also counter that argument by saying that when you look at some of the largest and most successful businesses all around the world, and most innovative businesses such as Facebook, as Google, as Hyundai maybe, then they also are very much aware that happy workers are also innovative and efficient workers. So I do believe that the happier or socially speaking more well-to-do students we can create, the better learners we can also create, and the more efficient they will also be and more innovative they will also be when they join the workforce. I am not saying that the Danish system is by all means perfect. I think we have much to learn from countries such as Korea. But I am saying that the Danish school system offers certain focuses, certain purposes that can be implemented into other systems in order for these systems to be even more successful than they have already been for the last 10 to 20 years. Thank you so much for inviting me to this conference, and I look forward to listening and responding to your questions. Thank you.
질문. 한국에는 한 학교에 상담교사가 한 명도 없는 학교가 많은데 16명이 학생들의 웰빙을 지원하고 있다니 놀랍습니다. 어떻게 이것이 가능했을까요? 특별한 이유가 있었을까요?
And I would like to start from the fact that it is extremely important that we make these problems relevant for what is going on in our classes. It doesn't make any sense to bring in problems that are not relevant for the classes that we do. But then I can give you a few examples of what we do at my school, at Rysensteen High School. For example, in math, we're working with understanding inequality in the United States using statistical methods so that we better understand social and economic inequality in the United States using math. Now the students will be much more motivated because they're working with a relevant subject that they read about every day in the newspapers than if they're just working with statistics and it's not attached to a certain subject. Another example would be in history, to use, for example, Korean history to understand why Korea is doing as well as it is now. For example, working with the miracle on the hand, but then again applying it to understanding Korea today, or understanding through Korean history the relationship with the United States or with Japan and so on. All of the time making it relevant for the students so that they can understand why are we actually working with this. You could also apply, for example, in English, texts, read text and write about K-pop, because there are brilliant texts on K-pop and the students will feel much more motivated when they are working on a subject that they find relevant. So another part of the question was if we have any courses teaching this in Denmark. And the short answer is no, because at our teachers' colleges, it is kind of built into all of the subjects, so that even if you have history, or if you have math, or if you're studying English or German language or whatever, you're always required to bring in real life problems. So we don't do it through one specific topic at our teachers' colleges, we do it through all of the topics that we're working with.
질문. 앞에서의 미국 수업과 덴마크 수업의 공통점은 삶과 연계한 수업이네요. 실생활을 교실로 들여오고 살아있는 수업이 되려면 지금의 문제를 다뤄야 합니다. 학생들이 배운 지식을 재생산하는 데 그치지 않고 삶의 과정에서 발생하는 문제를 헤쳐나가게 하는 역량을 기르는 일은 학교, 가정, 사회, 국가가 함께 고민해야 할 문제라고 생각합니다. 특히 교실에서 학생들을 직접 상대하는 교사들이 유념하고 교육에 임해야 할 것 같습니다. 교사 교육 과정에서 이러한 것들을 준비하는 과정을 제공하나요?
And the answer to this is that we do have special courses, both at university when you're studying to be a teacher, and afterwards when you're finished and you are working, then you can supplement your education with these courses. Most of these courses will be focusing on understanding students with problems. If they are unmotivated, if they feel bad for how things are going at home, then as a teacher you are better at understanding them, and you will be better at working with them so that they can keep on learning in an academic environment. Because the courses are not meant to make teachers into psychologists. There is a limit into how much teachers can do for the students. But they will be focusing on understanding the students so that we can keep them on track. For school counselors, it's a little different. They go one step further. They actually understand even better the psychology of the students, and they will work almost like psychologists. But if we have students with very severe psychological or family problems, then of course we are also connected to psychologists at our school, and that will also be the case for all other schools in Denmark.
질문. 우리나라의 초등학교는 시험이 없어졌는데 발표하기가 교육과정에서 다뤄지고 있고 사회적 관계 형성이 과목으로 들어와 있고 모든 것들을 시험으로 테스트를 한다니 놀라울 따름입니다. 이런 평가를 도입하고자 할 때 특별히 유의해야 할 점은 무엇인가요?
And the answer to this is that the starting point for working with students' social competences is that of course you understand and you know and you also explain what you would like for the students to achieve. What kind of a person would you like the students to become? So for us, the ideal is that students can be very academically ambitious, but at the same time, they must respect and empathize with their fellow students, and they must also be able to collaborate with them. So their ambitions must never be hurting other students. From this starting point, the teachers are giving feedback every day to the students, not in a formalized manner, not that they give the students feedback in writing, but they do it through their all feedback every day. So the students are not behaving in the way that we would like them to do. For example, bullying some of the other students. They will talk to them and say, why did you do that? They can also praise students if they are helping other students more, so that we will all the time let the students understand that this is what we strive for, and this is also what you should strive for, to become an understanding and respectful person. This is the way we do it, and it's also built into the Danish system that teachers are also assessed or evaluated based upon this. So when, for example, a principal is overviewing, seeing one of the classes, then he or she will also afterwards mention that to the teacher if they didn't work with the social competences. And because it's so important, it is also something that the teachers talk about amongst themselves all the time.